You had one job tonight, Ethan. And you couldn't even manage that. Assistant manager. That's all you'll ever be.
I want my keys and my badge. You are fired.
Okay.
She just fired the man who owns every brick of this building.
Start the protocol.
The chandelier lights of L'Etoile shimmered like scattered diamonds across white linen tablecloths, and for one perfect hour, everything had gone exactly as planned. Then the kitchen fell 10 minutes behind. I stood near the wine station, watching my wife's shoulders stiffen the moment she got the news. Luna had built this opening night in her head for months. Every plate, every playlist cue, every candle flicker rehearsed like a symphony. A 10-minute delay shouldn't have mattered, but when Councilman Reyes, our most important guest, raised an eyebrow at his empty table, something behind Luna's eyes snapped. I felt it before I saw it. That specific stillness people get right before they do something they can't take back. "Ethan?" Her voice cut across the dining room, sharp enough that 3 waiters froze mid-stride. "Get over here, now." I set down my clipboard and walked toward her, aware of every eye in the room swinging toward us like a tide pulling back before a wave. 20 staff members, a dozen tables of investors, food critics, and old money. And my wife, standing in the center of it all, vibrating with a fury that had clearly been building for weeks, not minutes. "Luna, let's talk about this in the office." "No!" She said it loud enough that a waiter carrying a tray of champagne actually stopped walking. "We're going to talk about it right here, because apparently that's the only way anything gets done around this place." I opened my mouth, but she wasn't finished. "You had one job tonight, Ethan. Coordinate the kitchen timing, and somehow, on the most important night of my career, my own assistant manager can't manage a 10-minute ticket delay." Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from something raw, like she was reaching for control and finding only air. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what tonight means for me?" "Luna." I kept my voice low, steady, the way I always did when she got like this. "People are watching." "Good, let them watch." Her eyes were glassy now, wild in a way I'd never seen in 7 years of marriage. "Because I am done covering for you. I am done pretending you're capable of handling real pressure. You're fired, Ethan. Assistant manager, effective immediately." The room went silent, except for the soft hiss of the espresso machine. I didn't move. Somewhere behind me, I heard a line cook whisper something to another, and a waitress covered her mouth with her hand. Councilman Reyes had gone very interested in his napkin. "Luna?" I kept my voice soft, almost gentle. "You don't want to do this. I want my keys and my badge." She held out her palm, fingers trembling slightly. "Right now." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for some flicker of the woman I married, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, sketching menu layouts on napkins, the one who cried the day we signed the lease for this building, gripping my hand so hard it left marks. She wasn't looking for that woman right now. She was looking for control, any control, in front of people whose respect she was terrified of losing. So I gave her what she asked for. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my key ring, and set it gently on the linen tablecloth beside her. Then I unclipped the security badge from my belt and placed it next to the keys, careful not to let my hand shake. "Okay," I said quietly. Just that. Okay. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't tell the room what I could have told them. That the lease on this building, the payroll system, the very electricity keeping those chandeliers glowing, all traced back to a company she'd never once thought to ask about. I didn't say a word about Vanguard Hospitality Holdings, or about the 3 years I'd spent quietly funding her dream from behind a wall of lawyers and shell paperwork, so she'd never feel like she was living inside someone else's gift. I just turned, walked past 20 stunned employees, past investors mid-sip, past the maitre d' who wouldn't meet my eyes, and pushed open the heavy glass doors of L'Etoile into the pouring rain. Behind me, I heard Luna's voice, thinner now, calling something toward the kitchen about resuming service. Already moving on. Already trying to convince the room that this was normal, that this was fine, that firing her own husband in front of the city's elite was simply an executive decision and nothing more. I stood under the awning for a moment, letting the cold air hit my face, letting the rain soak through my jacket before I even bothered opening my umbrella. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of secretly building her an empire, and it had ended with her voice cracking across a dining room, demanding my badge like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. I pulled out my phone. One new message from Marcus. Heard what happened. Call me. This changes things. I stared at the screen for a long moment, rain dripping off my hair onto the glass. Then I typed back 3 words that I knew would set something in motion neither of us could stop. Start the protocol. The rain hammered the roof of my car like it was trying to get my attention, as if the universe needed to underline what had just happened. I sat behind the wheel, engine off, keys still in my pocket. The wrong keys now, the ones to my car, not the restaurant I'd built from nothing but a signature and a secret. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I pulled my tie loose. I stared at the rearview mirror, at a version of myself that looked older than he had 2 hours ago. 3 years. That's how long I'd been living this double life. When my father passed, he left me an inheritance most people would call life-changing, enough to buy a house outright, or invest safely and watch it grow, or do all the sensible things a grieving 30-year-old is supposed to do with sudden money. Instead, I watched Luna cry in our kitchen one night, describing how her old boss at Bellamy's had passed her over for head chef position for the 3rd time, not because she wasn't talented, but because he liked keeping talented women exactly 1 rung below where they deserved to be. She'd whispered that maybe she just wasn't meant for more than middle management, that maybe she should stop dreaming so big. I couldn't let that be true. Not for her. So I made a decision I never told her about. I used every cent of that inheritance to quietly form Vanguard Hospitality Holdings, a company with my name buried 3 layers deep in the paperwork, run through Marcus's firm, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. Vanguard leased the building. Vanguard covered payroll during the brutal first 18 months when no restaurant turns a profit. Vanguard absorbed every risk so that when L'Etoile succeeded, and I always believed it would be entirely, unquestionably, hers. I never wanted her gratitude directed at me. I wanted her to wake up every morning proud of herself, not indebted to her husband's trust fund. I wanted the promotions, the reviews, the standing ovations from food critics to belong to Luna Reyes Hale, not to some silent benefactor pulling strings. Looking back now, soaked in a parking lot with rain streaming down the windshield, I wondered if that decision had been love, or if it had been its own quiet form of control. A different kind of lie than the one she just told the entire dining room, but a lie all the same. My phone buzzed again. Marcus, calling this time instead of texting. I answered on speaker, letting his voice fill the humid silence of the car. Ethan, talk to me. His tone was clipped, professional, the same voice he used when closing million-dollar deals, except this time there was real concern threaded underneath it. I got a call from Danny in the kitchen. He said Luna fired you, in front of everyone. Reyes was there, Ethan, the city councilman. This is going to be all over the industry blogs by morning. I know. My voice came out flatter than I expected. Are you okay? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I don't know what okay means right now. There was a pause on the line, papers shuffling in the background. Marcus, even at 10:30 at night, probably still at his desk reviewing contracts, because that's who he'd always been since law school. "You said start the protocol in your text," he said carefully. "You understand what that means, right? Once we activate the Vanguard clause, there's no quiet way to undo it. The moment Luna finds out you own this place, that you've owned it the entire time, everything changes. Your marriage, her trust in you, all of it." I stared out at the rain-streaked parking lot, watching a couple hurry past under one umbrella, laughing about something that had nothing to do with betrayal or secret companies or 7 years unraveling in a single dinner service. "She made her choice, Marcus," I said quietly. "She stood in the middle of that dining room and fired me like I was some replaceable employee, like 7 years meant nothing, like I meant nothing. She was under pressure. People say things. I know she was under pressure." My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. "I've watched her drowning for months, Marcus. I tried to help. I tried to lighten her load without making her feel like she needed rescuing. And tonight, in front of investors and staff and a councilman, she decided the easiest way to handle her own stress was to humiliate me and throw me out like garbage." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had softened. "This isn't really about the restaurant, is it?" "No," I admitted. "It's about finding out whether the woman I love still exists somewhere under all that pressure, or whether she's gone completely." The rain kept falling, drumming against the roof, filling the silence between us. "Okay," Marcus finally said. "If you're sure, I'll have the paperwork ready by 9 tomorrow morning. Board meeting, full disclosure, the works. Once Luna walks into that room, Ethan, there's no version of tonight where she doesn't find out everything." I closed my eyes, picturing her face, flushed with anger, glassy-eyed, desperate for control she'd already lost. "Good," I said. "It's time she found out everything." I hung up the phone, started the engine, and drove home alone through the rain, to a house that, tomorrow, would belong to a stranger. Luna hadn't slept. I could tell from 3 floors away, watching her storm across the marble lobby of the Vanguard building through the security monitor Marcus had pulled up on his laptop. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her blazer wrinkled at the shoulders, and even through a grainy camera feed, I could see the same fury from last night still burning behind her eyes. Except now, it had nowhere to land. "She's asking for HR, Marcus said, glancing at his phone as a text came in from the front desk. "Says she wants to file a formal complaint against her assistant manager's replacement and request an emergency review of restaurant staffing." "She thinks she's talking to corporate," I said, watching her jab the elevator button on the screen. "She has no idea corporate is us." Marcus straightened his tie, sliding a thick folder across the glass conference table toward the empty chair where Luna would sit in exactly 90 seconds. Inside were the incorporation documents for Vanguard Hospitality Holdings, the equity certificates showing 100% ownership under my legal name, and the original lease agreement for the building that housed L'Etoile. Every signature on every page, unmistakably mine. "Last chance to back out," Marcus said quietly, not looking up from arranging the papers into a neat, deliberate stack. I shook my head. "She needs to see it. All of it." The elevator doors chimed somewhere down the hall, and a moment later, the heavy boardroom door swung open. Luna walked in, expecting a junior HR coordinator with a clipboard and an apologetic smile. Instead, she found Marcus sitting at the head of a 20-foot glass table, flanked by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, with me standing quietly by the window, hands in my pockets. Her expression shifted through several stages in the span of 2 seconds: confusion, recognition, and then something colder settling into her jaw. "What is this?" Her voice was tight, controlled in the way people get controlled right before they lose it completely. "Ethan, what are you doing here? This is corporate headquarters. I need to speak with someone from ownership about a staffing emergency." "You are speaking with ownership," Marcus said calmly, sliding the folder across the table until it stopped directly in front of her empty chair. Please, sit down, Ms. Reyes-Hale. Luna didn't sit. She stood frozen, staring at the folder like it might be some kind of trick. I don't understand, she said slowly. Where is the actual owner? I was told Vanguard Holdings owns this property. I need to speak to them directly about replacing my former assistant manager. You're looking at him, Marcus said, nodding toward me. The silence that followed felt like it stretched for an entire minute, though it was probably only 3 or 4 seconds. Luna's eyes moved from Marcus to me to the folder and back to me again, her mind visibly trying to construct a version of reality where this made sense and failing every time. That's not funny, Ethan. Her voice wavered, uncertain now instead of angry. Whatever this is, it's not funny. Open the folder, Luna, I said quietly. She sat down slowly, like her legs had made the decision without consulting the rest of her, and pulled the folder toward herself with visibly trembling hands. The first page was the Certificate of Incorporation for Vanguard Hospitality Holdings, dated 3 years and 2 months earlier, 6 months before we'd even signed the lease for L'Etoile's building. My signature sat at the bottom, notarized, unmistakable. She flipped to the second page. Equity distribution. 100%, single shareholder, Ethan James Hale. Her hand stopped on the third page, the original lease agreement for the L'Etoile building. The same document she'd once told me she'd fought corporate for months to secure favorable terms on. My signature was there too, dated the same week she'd celebrated landing what she thought was the deal of a lifetime. You! Her voice broke completely. You own this? You've owned this the entire time? The lease, all of it? I own it, I confirmed, my voice steady even as my chest felt like it was caving in, watching her unravel piece by piece across the table. I have since before we ever broke ground. 3 years. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves into something less devastating. 3 years of you watching me struggle to make payroll, watching me negotiate with vendors, watching me celebrate every small win like I'd earned it against impossible odds. You did earn it, I said. Every bit of L'Etoile's success is yours, Luna. I just made sure you had a floor that wouldn't collapse under you. Don't. Her voice cracked, sharp and raw. Don't you dare frame this like some kind of gift. You lied to me. For years. In our marriage. Marcus cleared his throat gently, sliding one final document across the table, the most important one. There's something else you need to understand, Ms. Reyes-Hale. Under the operating bylaws Ethan established, any founder termination requires board approval. What happened at the restaurant 2 nights ago, publicly firing Ethan without corporate authorization, was, legally speaking, invalid. It never actually took effect. Luna's head snapped up. What does that mean? It means, Marcus said quietly, that your own actions on opening night have triggered an immediate corporate review of your management contract. As of this morning, your position as head manager of L'Etoile is under formal suspension, pending investigation. Luna stared at both of us, betrayal and fury, and something that looked almost like grief warring across her face, the folder trembling slightly in her hands, the empire she thought she'd built alone, suddenly revealing itself as a stage she never knew she was standing on. She texted me at noon, just 4 words. We need to talk. I almost didn't respond. Part of me, the part still raw from watching her storm out of the boardroom without another glance at me, wanted to let her sit in that silence a little longer. But another part, the part that had spent 3 years quietly building a life around her happiness, couldn't stand the thought of her sitting alone with all that pain. I suggested the botanical gardens, neutral ground, somewhere far enough from the restaurant, from Vanguard, from anything that smelled like business. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench beneath a canopy of magnolia trees, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warm afternoon. She didn't look like the woman who'd fired me in front of 20 employees. She looked smaller, somehow, stripped down to something more honest. I sat down at the far end of the bench, leaving space between us, like a boundary neither of us was ready to cross yet. "How long were you going to let me believe I built this myself?" Her voice was quiet, none of the fire from the boardroom left in it, just exhaustion, and underneath that, something that sounded dangerously close to grief. "Forever, if I could have," I admitted. "I never wanted you to know, Luna, not because I didn't trust you with the truth, but because I didn't want you to ever look at your own success and wonder how much of it was really yours." She turned to look at me then, her eyes red-rimmed, makeup long since cried away. "You don't get to decide that for me. What was mine and what wasn't. That wasn't your choice to make." "You're right." I let out a slow breath. "It wasn't. I see that now. But Luna, 3 years ago, you sat in our kitchen and cried because Marcus Bellamy passed you over for head chef for the 3rd time. You told me maybe you weren't meant for more than middle management. Do you remember that?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. "I remember watching the woman I loved convince herself she was small," I continued, my voice thickening despite my effort to stay steady. "And I couldn't fix the industry, or the men who kept underestimating you, or the years you'd already lost proving yourself to people who never gave you a fair shot. But I could give you a building with no ceiling, a place where the only person who could hold you back was you." "So you built me a cage instead," she said bitterly, "dressed up as a gift." "Maybe," I said quietly, because I owed her honesty now, all of it, no matter how much it cost me. I've been asking myself that same question since you handed me that folder yesterday. I thought I was protecting your pride, but maybe I was just protecting my own need to feel like I mattered in your success, without ever having to risk you rejecting my help outright. She was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of children chase each other across the grass near the fountain, oblivious to the wreckage sitting nearby on a park bench. "I accused you of building our marriage on a lie," she finally said. "But it wasn't just your lie, was it? I've been lying too, to myself, pretending I had everything under control when I haven't slept more than 4 hours a night in 6 months. Pretending the panic attacks in the walk-in freezer were just stress. Pretending firing my own husband in front of Councilman Reyes was some kind of leadership moment instead of what it actually was." "What was it?" I asked gently. Her voice cracked. "I was drowning, Ethan. And instead of asking for help, I decided the only way to prove I was strong enough was to destroy the person closest to me." I wanted to reach for her hand, but I held back, unsure if that comfort was mine to offer anymore. "I've spent the last 2 days going through the operational files," I said instead. "Marcus and I found the vendor contracts you'd been negotiating alone, the 18-hour shifts, the supply cost spikes you never once mentioned to me. Luna, you weren't cruel that night. You were breaking." Tears slid silently down her face now, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "That doesn't excuse what I did to you," she whispered, "in front of everyone." "No," I agreed softly. "It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it, and there's a difference." We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything settling between us like the humid afternoon air. "So what happens now?" she finally asked. "Am I fired? Officially this time?" "No," I shook my head. "But you are being placed on mandatory administrative leave. 2 weeks, fully paid. No calls from the restaurant, no vendor emails, nothing. You're going to rest, Luna, whether you believe you need it or not." She let out a broken, humorless laugh. "You're doing it again. Making decisions about my life without asking me." "Maybe," I said. "But this time I'm telling you to your face instead of hiding it behind a lawyer and a folder." She looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind her exhausted eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the smallest crack of understanding. 2 weeks, she repeated quietly, almost to herself, like she was testing whether she could survive stepping away from the thing she'd built her entire identity around. 2 weeks, I confirmed. Starting now. The Vanguard legal suite smelled like fresh coffee and old paper, and for the first time in 3 years, I sat behind a desk that was legally, undeniably mine. Not as a silent partner hiding behind Marcus's signature, but as the acting owner stepping back into daylight. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like grief with a briefcase. Marcus had pulled every operational file related to L'Etoile going back 18 months. Vendor contracts, payroll logs, supply chain invoices, internal communications between Luna and the restaurant's management team. My job, technically, was to conduct a routine ownership review during her suspension, make sure the business Luna had built was healthy enough to survive whatever came next, whether that meant her return or her replacement. But 2 hours into reading, I wasn't looking at numbers anymore. I was looking at a portrait of a woman slowly being crushed under weight she never once let me see.
"Look at this," Marcus said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the desk, his voice quieter than I'd heard it in years. Timestamps on our email correspondence with vendors. Look at the send times. I scanned down the column. 11:47 p.m., 1:15 a.m., 3:30 a.m. Night after night, week after week, stretching back for months. She wasn't sleeping, I said, more to myself than to Marcus. She wasn't sleeping, and she wasn't asking for help, Marcus replied, pulling up another document. Look at the produce contracts from Halloway Farms. 3 months ago, they hiked prices 22% overnight, no warning. Standard move would be to escalate to ownership, renegotiate terms, maybe threaten to switch suppliers. Instead, he turned his laptop toward me. I read the email chain in silence. Luna, alone, absorbing the entire cost increase into the restaurant's operating budget without telling anyone, quietly cutting corners elsewhere to compensate, reducing weekly deep cleaning services, delaying a piece of kitchen equipment repair that any inspector would flag as a serious violation risk, dipping into what should have been staff bonus reserves. She'd been trying to protect everyone from the truth of how bad things had gotten, everyone except herself.
"There's more," Marcus said, and something in his tone made my stomach tighten before he even continued. I found a series of messages between Luna and a produce rep named Danny Kessler. He was pressuring her, Ethan, not just on pricing. Late-night calls, comments in these texts that read like borderline harassment, implying he could make things easier for her supply chain if she was more accommodating during renegotiations. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Did she report it? No. Marcus shook his head slowly. She just kept negotiating with him directly, alone, week after week, absorbing whatever he threw at her because she was terrified that going to corporate, going to me, going to you, would confirm every fear she had about not being capable enough to run this place on her own. I sat back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, the full shape of the last 6 months finally coming into focus. This wasn't a woman who had grown arrogant with success. This was a woman drowning in silence, so terrified of appearing weak that she'd rather absorb harassment and financial strain alone than admit she needed anyone. And on opening night, when the kitchen fell 10 minutes behind and Councilman Reyes raised an eyebrow, all of that unspoken pressure had finally found somewhere to go. It went to me. The one person close enough to hit. "I keep thinking about the boardroom," I said quietly. How devastated she looked when she found out about Vanguard. I thought that was about the lie, but maybe part of it was relief underneath all that anger. Relief that someone finally knew how bad things really were. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. "You still love her?" It wasn't a question, but I answered it anyway. I never stopped. That's what makes this so complicated. I built her a company to protect her from ever feeling small again. And somewhere along the way, protecting her turned into leaving her completely alone with the hardest parts. "So what do you want to do?" Marcus asked. "Officially, as owner, you could bring in an outside general manager, professional, experienced, no personal complications. Or I go get her," I said, the decision settling into place even as I spoke the words.
Not as her boss, not as the man who owns the building she thought was hers, just as her husband, showing up to tell her the truth about what I found in these files. Marcus gathered the papers into a neat stack, sliding them into a folder marked Confidential, Ownership Review, and looked at me with something like cautious hope. 2 weeks isn't much time to fix 7 years, Ethan. No, I agreed, standing, already reaching for my jacket. But it's enough time to finally tell each other the truth. All of it. No more silent companies, no more absorbed harassment, no more pretending we're each carrying our half of this alone. I picked up the folder containing every painful, hidden detail of Luna's collapse and tucked it under my arm. She needs to know I found this, I said, not to shame her, so she finally understands that breaking under that kind of weight was never a weakness. It was just what happens to anyone who tries to hold up a building alone. I walked out of the legal suite into the midday sun, already dialing the number for Luna's sister, because I needed an address. The lake house, 2 hours outside the city, where Luna had gone to disappear for a while. It was time to stop letting her disappear alone. The drive took just under 2 hours, and I spent most of it rehearsing words that all sounded wrong the moment I imagined saying them out loud. I found the files. I know about Danny Kessler. I know you weren't sleeping. Every version sounded like an accusation dressed up as concern, and that was the last thing Luna needed right now. The lake house sat at the end of a gravel road, half hidden behind a curtain of willow trees, exactly as I remembered it from the 2 summers we'd visited before her parents passed. Luna's sister, Maren, met me at the door with a tired, knowing look. "She's down at the dock," Maren said quietly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "She's been out there for hours. Ethan..." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder toward the water. "She's not doing great. I've never seen her like this." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." I found Luna sitting cross-legged on the weathered wooden dock, staring out at the still lake as the sun began its slow descent behind the tree line, painting the water in soft shades of orange and violet. She'd traded her tailored blazers for an old college sweatshirt, her hair loose and unbrushed, and for a moment, she looked exactly like the 23-year-old woman I'd fallen in love with. Before restaurants and boardrooms and secret companies had complicated everything between us. "Maren called you," she said without turning around, her voice flat, unsurprised. "She's worried about you." I walked slowly onto the dock, the old boards creaking beneath my feet, and sat down a careful distance away, letting my legs dangle over the edge beside hers. "So am I." "You shouldn't be here, Ethan." But there was no real force behind the words. "I fired you. I humiliated you in front of the entire staff. I found out my husband secretly owns the empire I thought I built with my own 2 hands. I don't think worried is the emotion you're supposed to have right now." "Maybe not the smart one," I admitted, "but it's the honest one." She was quiet for a long moment, watching a heron glide low across the water before disappearing into the reeds on the far shore. "I went through the files, Luna," I said finally, deciding there was no gentle way into this conversation, only a true one. "The vendor emails, the timestamps, the renegotiations with Halloway Farms." Her shoulders tensed visibly, and she wrapped her arms tighter around her knees. "You had no right." "I know," I said. "But I needed to understand what happened to you, what happened to us. And Luna..." I paused, choosing my next words with care. "I found the messages from Danny Kessler, too." Her whole body went rigid, and when she finally turned to look at me, her eyes were wide with something between shame and fear. "You weren't supposed to see that." "I know that too," I said gently. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell anyone what he was implying to you?" Her jaw trembled, and for the first time since I'd known her, I watched Luna Reyes Hale, the woman who commanded kitchens and negotiated contracts and never once asked for help, completely fall apart. "Because if I told you," she said, voice breaking, "I would have had to admit that I couldn't handle it, that I wasn't strong enough to run this place without someone rescuing me.
And I was so terrified of becoming that person, the woman who needed saving, that I just kept absorbing it. All of it. The harassment, the price hikes, the 18-hour days. I thought if I could just hold it all together silently, no one would ever know how close I was to breaking. Luna. My voice cracked on her name. You didn't have to prove anything to me. Not ever. But I did, she said, tears streaming freely now. Not to you, to myself. Every promotion I lost at Bellamy's, every time some man in a suit told me I wasn't ready for more responsibility, I carried that with me into L'Etoile like armor. I told myself I would never again be the woman who wasn't enough. And somewhere along the way, that armor turned into something that made me treat everyone around me like an obstacle, including you. I saw it happening, I admitted quietly. I watched you change month after month, and I didn't know how to reach you without making you feel like I was one more person who thought you couldn't handle it. You should have told me, she whispered. You're right, I said. I should have. Instead, I built you a silent safety net and hoped it would be enough to save you from yourself. It wasn't. I'm sorry, Luna, for all of it. The secrecy, the distance, watching you drown instead of pulling you out sooner. She reached over then, her hand finding mine on the weathered dockboards, her fingers cold and trembling. Firing you in front of everyone, she said softly. That was the moment I realized I'd completely lost myself. I looked at you, the person who has never once made me feel small in 7 years, and some broken part of me needed to make someone feel small, just so I could feel like I had control of something, anything. I'm not going anywhere, I said quietly, squeezing her hand. But Luna, we can't go back to how things were. Not the secrets, not the silence, not either of us pretending we can carry impossible weight alone. She nodded slowly, tears still falling, the last golden light of sunset reflecting across the still lake water. I don't know how to be different, she admitted. I don't know how to ask for help without feeling like I'm failing. Then we'll learn together, I said, starting now. 3 days after the lake house, L'Etoile was falling apart. I hadn't wanted to install a temporary manager while Luna finished her leave, but the board had insisted, some neutral, experienced hand to keep the restaurant steady until she returned. His name was Gerald Finch, a man with 20 years of hospitality experience and a resume that looked flawless on paper. What the resume hadn't mentioned was his complete inability to read a kitchen the way Luna could, or diffuse a conflict the quiet way I always had, standing just close enough to a tense conversation to remind people someone was watching without ever raising my voice. I got the first warning sign Tuesday morning, a text from Danny, the head line cook, saying 2 of the newer prep cooks had walked out mid-shift after Gerald publicly criticized their knife work in front of a full dining room during brunch service. I told myself it was an isolated incident. Every kitchen has bad days. By Thursday evening, it was clear this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a slow-motion collapse. I sat in my car outside the restaurant, phone pressed to my ear, listening to Danny's voice shake with barely controlled panic. Ethan, I need you to understand how bad this actually is, he said, the clatter of a stressed kitchen audible behind him. Marisol quit an hour ago, just walked off the line mid-service, no notice. 2 servers called in sick for tonight, which we both know means they're job hunting. Gerald's been micromanaging every single plate that leaves this kitchen, second-guessing recipes Luna perfected over 18 months, and honestly, man, morale is in the toilet. How bad is tonight specifically? I asked, already feeling my stomach tighten. There was a pause, and when Danny spoke again, his voice had dropped lower, more urgent. Ethan, Priya just told me the reservation system flagged something for tonight. Table 12, 8 p.m. It's under a fake name, but the note attached says VIP, handle with extreme care. I did some digging, and I'm 90% sure it's Adrian Voss. My blood went cold. Adrian Voss was the most feared restaurant critic in the city,
the woman whose single-paragraph reviews had closed 3 well-regarded establishments in the past 2 years alone. A visit from her, unannounced, on a night when the kitchen was hemorrhaging staff and morale, wasn't bad luck. It was a countdown to disaster. "Does Gerald know?" I asked. "Gerald doesn't know anything, that's the problem," Danny said, frustration bleeding through every word. "He's been so busy trying to prove he's in control that he hasn't noticed half the staff is one bad shift away from quitting entirely. If Voss walks in tonight and gets slow service, cold plates, or watches the front of house fall apart the way it did during brunch, L'Etoile is finished, Ethan. Not struggling, finished. You know how this industry works. One review from her, and reservations dry up within a week." I closed my eyes, gripping the steering wheel, feeling the full weight of everything Luna had built. Everything I'd secretly protected for 3 years, teetering on the edge of collapse because of a temporary manager who understood spreadsheets but had never learned to read the quiet panic in a stressed sous chef's eyes, or the particular way Luna used to walk the floor during dinner rush, touching a shoulder here, offering a quiet word there, holding the entire operation together through sheer force of attentiveness that no org chart could replicate. "Where's Gerald right now?" I asked. "In the office, on the phone with corporate, trying to figure out how to message this proactively," Danny said, and I could practically hear him rolling his eyes through the phone. "Ethan, I don't think he can save tonight. I don't think anyone can save tonight. Except..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "Except Luna. Except the 2 of us, together, the way we should have been operating this restaurant from the very beginning, instead of me hiding behind ownership papers and her carrying every burden alone in silence." "Give me 20 minutes, I said, already starting the car. I drove faster than I should have through downtown traffic, running through everything Danny had told me. A critical review from Adrian Voss wasn't just bad press. It would undo 18 months of Luna's reputation building in a single Sunday feature article. It would validate every fear she'd ever carried about not being good enough, permanently, publicly, in print. I thought about calling Gerald directly, giving him instructions, trying to manage the crisis remotely the way I'd managed everything else about this restaurant. Quietly, invisibly, from a safe distance where I never had to risk being seen as anything other than successful. But sitting at a red light 3 blocks from the restaurant, watching rain start to speckle my windshield for the second time in 10 days, I realized that approach had already failed us once. Managing things invisibly from behind the scenes was exactly what had gotten us here. Luna drowning alone because she never knew there was a hand extended toward her. Me protecting her from a distance instead of standing directly beside her where she could actually see me. I pulled out my phone and called Luna instead. She answered on the second ring, her voice tentative, still raw from our conversation at the lake 3 days earlier. "Ethan, is everything okay?" "No," I said honestly, turning onto the street that led toward L'Etoile, its lit windows visible now through the rain-streaked windshield. "The restaurant is falling apart, Luna. Adrian Voss might be walking through those doors in half an hour, and Gerald has no idea how to hold this kitchen together." I heard her sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "I need you," I said simply. "Not corporate ownership, not a temporary fix. I need you, standing beside me, the way we should have been doing this from the start." There was a long pause, and then, finally, her voice, steadier than I'd heard it in over a week. "I'm on my way." Luna came through the back door exactly 18 minutes later, rain-soaked and breathless, having driven faster than either of us would ever admit to out loud. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a moment, taking in the chaos. Gerald pacing near the pass with his phone pressed to his ear, 2 remaining line cooks moving at a frantic, uncoordinated pace, and Danny frantically trying to plate a dish that was clearly missing its garnish. For a second, I watched something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe, or the old instinct to freeze under pressure the way she had on opening night. Then it passed, and something steadier took its place. "Gerald," she said, walking past him toward the office without breaking stride. "You're relieved for the evening. Go home. I've got this." Gerald opened his mouth to argue, glanced at me standing near the walk-in, and apparently decided against it. He grabbed his jacket off the hook and left without another word. And honestly, the kitchen felt lighter the moment the door closed behind him. I found Luna in the small office a moment later, already pulling her hair back with a spare tie from the drawer, checking the reservation screen with sharp, focused eyes. "Table 12, 8 p.m., party of 2 under the name Alderman," she read aloud. "Danny's right. That's Voss's usual alias when she's doing a stealth review. She used the same one at Brasserie Coeur before she wrote the piece that closed them down." "We have 30 minutes, I said. Luna turned to look at me, and for the first time since the boardroom, I saw something in her expression that wasn't anger or grief or exhaustion. It was resolve. "I can't run the front and the kitchen at the same time," she said. "Not tonight. Not with 2 cooks and half a serving staff." "Then don't," I said, pulling an apron off the hook and tying it around my waist. "I'll run the pass, you run the floor." She blinked at me, surprised. "You haven't worked a kitchen line in years, Ethan." "No," I agreed, rolling up my sleeves. "But I've watched you do it for 3 years, every single night, memorizing every plate specification, without you ever knowing I was paying attention. I know the menu, Luna. I know the timing. Let me help." For a long moment, she just looked at me, really looked at me, the way she had at the lake house, like she was seeing something she'd forgotten how to notice. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, let's do this together." What followed was unlike anything either of us had experienced in 7 years of marriage and 3 years of running this restaurant in parallel. Separate silences. Luna moved onto the floor like she'd never left, checking in with the 2 remaining servers, redistributing tables, personally greeting Voss's party at table 12 with warmth and confidence that gave no hint of the crisis unfolding behind the kitchen doors. I took the pass, calling out tickets in the calm, steady rhythm I'd absorbed from years of quiet observation, coordinating with Danny and the remaining line cook to streamline every order. Midway through the dinner rush, a ticket came back, the seared scallop appetizer for table 12, plated incorrectly, missing the citrus reduction that made the dish distinctive. In the old days, this would have triggered a screaming match, Luna's voice cutting across the kitchen in panic, staff flinching at every raised syllable. Instead, she appeared at the pass window seconds after I caught the error, her voice low and calm. "What do we need?" "Citrus reduction, 90 seconds, I said, already reaching for the pan. "I'll stall the table," she said, and disappeared back onto the floor without a hint of the old frantic energy, returning moments later with an update. "They're enjoying the wine pairing. We're fine." We fell into a rhythm neither of us had ever achieved before, not during opening night, not during any of the 18 months leading up to it. I called out modifications, she relayed table dynamics from the floor, and together we anticipated problems before they became crises, communicating in short, efficient exchanges instead of the old pattern of silent suffering followed by explosive collapse. By the time dessert service began, the kitchen had found a steady heartbeat again. Danny caught my eye across the pass at one point, a small, disbelieving smile forming on his exhausted face, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was witnessing. 2 hours later, as the last guests lingered over coffee and the kitchen finally slowed into cleanup, Luna walked back into the kitchen, exhaustion written across her face. But something else there too, a lightness I hadn't seen in months. "Table 12 just left," she said quietly. "Voss shook my hand on the way out, said it was the smoothest, most attentive service she'd experienced all year. She didn't say anything about a review, but Ethan..." Her voice caught slightly. "She smiled. Adrian Voss actually smiled." The remaining kitchen staff, gathered near the walk-in cooler, broke into quiet, relieved applause, and Danny let out a whoop that echoed off the stainless steel counters. I looked at Luna across the kitchen, both of us sweaty, exhausted, aprons stained from a night of frantic teamwork, and felt something shift permanently between us. Not the collapse of the old dynamic, but the birth of something entirely new. "We did that together," I said quietly, walking toward her. "No shouting," she said, almost wonderingly, like she was still processing it. No ego, just us, I finished. Finally, just us. She reached out and took my hand, right there in the middle of the kitchen, in front of the staff who had watched us fall apart publicly 10 days earlier and had just witnessed us find our way back to each other in the middle of chaos. I think, Luna said softly, we just saved more than the restaurant tonight. 2 days after the night we saved the restaurant together, the formal corporate restructuring was finalized in a much quieter meeting than the one that had upended Luna's world 8 days earlier. No dramatic folders slid across glass tables this time. Just Marcus, Luna, and me, sitting in his office, reviewing terms we'd all agreed on together, each of us contributing to language that would define not just a business partnership, but the next chapter of our marriage. I stepped down from active floor management entirely, remaining Vanguard's silent owner in name only, the paperwork intact, but the secrecy gone. Luna was reinstated not as the sole overburdened head manager who'd nearly broken herself, proving she needed no one, but as managing partner, with a real leadership team beneath her, a mandatory 2-week vacation built into her contract every year, and a standing agreement that any vendor harassment, any threatening renegotiation tactic, any Danny Kessler who thought pressuring a woman alone in a room was an acceptable business strategy would be reported directly to corporate and handled by legal. No exceptions, no silent absorption of abuse dressed up as toughness. Danny Kessler, as it turned out, wouldn't be a problem for much longer. Marcus had quietly begun compiling Luna's documented interactions with him, and Halloway Farms' corporate office was less than thrilled to learn one of their reps had been leveraging supply contracts as a means of pressuring a restaurant owner. That was a conversation for another day, but it was, at least, finally out in the open instead of buried in Luna's private folder of unsent complaints. Tonight, though, the business was finished. Tonight was just us. The last staff member left around 10:30, the final round of closing duties completed with the kind of easy, relaxed energy that had been entirely absent from L'Etoile for months. Danny had stuck his head into the dining room on his way out, grinning at the two of us sitting together at a small table near the window. "Feels different in here," he'd said simply, before disappearing into the night. He was right. It did feel different. Luna and I sat across from each other at table 6, the same table, coincidentally, where Councilman Reyes had once raised an eyebrow at a 10-minute delay that started this entire unraveling. The dining room lights were dimmed to their nighttime setting, just enough glow to see each other clearly without the harsh brightness of full service hours. A single candle flickered between us, and for the first time in longer than either of us could remember, there was no crisis waiting in the wings, no vendor emergency, no secret to manage, no power dynamic quietly poisoning the space between us. "I keep thinking about that night," Luna said quietly, turning her water glass slowly on the tablecloth. "How I stood right there," she gestured toward the center of the dining room, now empty and dark, "and threw away 7 years in about 90 seconds because I couldn't handle one 10-minute delay." "You weren't just throwing away 7 years," I said gently. "You were breaking under 6 months of silence. The delay was never really the problem." "I know that now," she said. "I don't think I understood it then. I thought if I just held everything together tight enough, nobody would ever see the cracks. Turns out, holding on that tight is exactly what caused them." I reached across the table and took her hand, the same way she'd taken mine in the kitchen 2 nights earlier. "I did the same thing," I admitted. "Different method, same instinct. I thought if I built you an invisible safety net, protected you from every hard truth about money and risk, I was loving you well. But real love isn't invisible, Luna. It's not a silent company hiding behind a lawyer's signature. It should have been me, standing next to you at 2 in the morning while you negotiated with Halloway Farms, not a folder of paperwork discovered after everything nearly fell apart." "So where does that leave us?" she asked softly. "Now that the restaurant is stable again, Now that the truth is finally out, what happens tomorrow? Tomorrow, I said, we go back to being partners, real ones. No hidden ownership stakes, no absorbed harassment, no 18-hour shifts you're too proud to mention. If something's breaking you, I want to know before it costs us 7 years in 90 seconds again. She smiled. A small, tired, genuine smile. The first one I'd seen from her since before opening night. Total transparency, even when it's ugly. Especially when it's ugly, I agreed. That's when we need it most. She squeezed my hand across the table, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything at all. The candle flickered between us, casting soft shadows across a dining room that had witnessed our public collapse and, 12 days later, our quiet rebuilding. I love you, Luna said finally. Not the version of me that fired you in front of everyone. Not the version of you that hid an entire company from me for 3 years. Just us. Whoever we're supposed to be when we stop performing strength for everyone else. I love you too, I said. All of it. The mess, the mistakes, the two people who apparently needed to nearly lose everything to finally learn how to actually talk to each other. We stood together, blew out the candle, and walked through the dim dining room toward the front doors, past the wine station where she'd once demanded my badge, past the center of the floor where 20 employees had once watched our marriage crack open in public. Outside, the night air was cool and clear, no rain this time, just quiet city streets and the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier shower. Luna slipped her hand into mine as we walked toward the car together, not as owner and manager, not as a secret benefactor and an unknowing wife, but as two people who had finally, painfully, learned how to build something honest between them. Behind us, L'Étoile stood quiet and dark, its future no longer resting on secrets or silent sacrifice, but on the fragile, hard-won foundation of two people choosing, every day from now on, to stop carrying everything alone.